Welcome and thank you so much for being here. My name is Dr. Wanda Jean Jones, and I'll be your guide throughout this training on foster care and adoption. This is more than just a course, it's a conversation about the realities that thousands of children and families face every day, and it's a call to action for those of us who work in early childhood education, family support, or child development. The title of this course may sound simple: Foster Care and Adoption in Kentucky, an Overview, but the stories behind that title are anything but simple. Every number represents a child. Every case involves a family, and every one of those families is navigating a system that is layered, emotional, and often misunderstood. As we begin, I want to acknowledge something important. If you're here as an educator, caregiver, or childcare provider, you may already be working with children who have been removed from their homes. You might not always know their background or have the full picture, but you do see their behaviors. You do witness their struggles with regulation, separation anxiety, or aggression. And you do make a difference, sometimes just by showing up consistently each day with kindness and calm. This course is designed to give you a stronger foundation for that work. You'll learn about how children enter care, the trauma they carry with them, the types of homes they may be placed in, and the legal structures that shape their experience. We'll talk honestly about what's working in the system and where it still falls short. And you'll gain language, insight, and practical knowledge that will help you serve children and families more intentionally, no matter what role you play. The photograph on this slide tells a powerful story: children of different ages and backgrounds smiling on what has become a joyful day, Adoption Day. But what you don't see are the months or even years that led up to that moment. The court hearings, the tears, the transitions, the waiting. This course won't sugarcoat that journey, but it will help you understand it. Throughout the training, I'll reference real-world examples, current data, and decades of research on trauma and child development. And while the focus is on Kentucky's system, many of the concepts we'll cover are relevant across the country. As you listen, I encourage you to bring your full self to this experience. Bring your compassion, bring your curiosity, bring your desire to do better for the children in your care. Because the truth is, you don't have to be a foster parent or an adoption worker to have a lifelong impact on a child in the system. Sometimes you just have to be the one who sees them, who listens, who offers consistency when everything else in their world feels uncertain. Let's begin. Let's take a look at what we'll cover together in this training. This is your roadmap for the hour ahead. Each section builds on the one before it, so that by the end, you'll have a holistic understanding, not just of the policies and facts, but of the people and principles behind them. Our first stop is the mission of DCBS, the Department for Community-Based Services. Now, DCBS is the backbone of child welfare in our state. They're the agency responsible for responding to child abuse and neglect, placing children in foster homes, and working toward permanency. But their mission is about more than case files and compliance. It's about creating conditions where families can heal and children can thrive. We'll explore what that mission looks like in practice, and we'll also talk about how decisions are made about when a child should be removed from the home and when it's safe to return. Next, we'll dig into trauma and child welfare. This is one of the most important parts of our conversation. Children who enter care, whether it's for a week, a month, or several years, do not arrive with a clean slate. They come with emotional wounds, survival strategies, and often deep mistrust. As caregivers and educators, it's critical that we understand how trauma shows up. Sometimes it looks like anger or defiance. Sometimes it's hyperactivity. Sometimes it's total shutdown. And if we're not careful, we'll label it as bad behavior instead of what it really is, a signal of pain and fear. This section will help you recognize those signs and respond with empathy and skill. After that, we'll cover the legal framework that governs child welfare. This includes major federal legislation like the Adoption and Safe Families Act and how those laws shape timelines for reunification, parental rights, and adoption. We'll clarify what each law intends to do, what permanency planning means, and how legal mandates intersect with real-life complexity. Finally, we'll focus on caregiving and adoption. You'll learn about the different types of foster placements, from licensed foster homes to kinship care and fictive kin. We'll talk about the increasing reliance on relatives, how caregivers are approved, and what kinds of supports are available to those caring for children long term. Now, I want you to know this isn't just theory. Everything in this course connects to the real life experiences of children in care and to the daily decisions made by providers like you. Whether you work in a preschool classroom, run a home based center, or provide after school care, your role is vital. So take a breath, settle in, and let's walk through this together with compassion, with curiosity, and with a deep respect for the children and families we serve. Let's begin by grounding ourselves in the mission of DCBS, the Department for Community-Based Services. DCBS is the agency responsible for overseeing child protection in the state, and their mission is clear: to protect children from abuse and neglect by partnering with families, relatives, caregivers, community agencies, and the courts. Their work is focused on three things: safety, permanency, and well-being. Now, I want to pause and unpack that a little, because those three words, safety, permanency, and well-being, can sound like policy language, but they're not. They're very human goals. Safety means making sure a child is not being harmed physically, emotionally, or developmentally. Permanency means that a child has a stable, consistent place to belong. And well-being means looking at the child's whole self, their mental health, education, physical health, and emotional needs. DCBS doesn't operate in isolation. They rely heavily on community-based partners, people like you and me, to help protect children and support families. Childcare providers are often the very first people to spot something concerning, to report it, and to offer a safe and stable space for children who are navigating trauma at home. One of the biggest misconceptions about foster care is that it's supposed to be a permanent solution. But in fact, foster care is meant to be temporary. The goal from day one is usually reunification, helping the child return home to a safer, more stable version of their original family whenever possible. If that's not safe or possible, then the system begins looking at relatives, kinship placements, or ultimately adoption. Statistics show that roughly 75% of children in foster care are eventually reunified with their biological family or placed with relatives. So, when we talk about foster care, we're talking about a bridge, a transitional time in a child's life, ideally one that leads to healing and stability. But we have to remember, every day that a child is in foster care is a day they're living with uncertainty. They don't know what's coming next. They may not understand why they can't go home. They may be afraid, angry, confused, or even relieved, and often all of those emotions show up at once. As professionals in early care and education, our job is not to solve the legal complexities of these cases, but it is our job to understand them, to know that there's a bigger picture behind the behaviors we see in the classroom. When a child is acting out or shutting down, when they're clingy one moment and avoidant the next, we can anchor our response in the reality that they are navigating instability far beyond what they can articulate. Understanding the DCBS mission helps us partner more effectively. It also helps us stay focused on what we can do, provide consistency, model safe adult relationships, and contribute to a sense of belonging that every child deserves, no matter what their current circumstances are. So let's keep this mission in mind as we continue through the training, because safety, permanency, and well-being aren't just legal goals, they are developmental needs. And they are deeply intertwined with everything we do in early care. This slide asks a painful but necessary question. Why do children enter foster care? The reasons fall into four main categories: neglect, abuse, dependency, and human trafficking. Each of these represents a situation in which a child's safety or basic needs are not being met in their home environment. Let's start with neglect. This is the most common reason for removal. Neglect doesn't always look dramatic. It can be as simple as a child not having access to food, clothing, supervision, or medical care. Sometimes it's chronic lack of hygiene. Sometimes it's a toddler left alone for hours. Sometimes it's a parent who's physically present but emotionally unavailable due to substance use or mental illness. Neglect is damaging because it deprives the child of basic stability. And in young children, it often disrupts attachment and brain development. Then there's abuse. This can include physical harm like hitting or shaking, but it also includes emotional abuse and sexual abuse. It's important to remember that children may not be able to explain what has happened to them, but they often show us through behavior, fear responses, aggression, regression, or withdrawal. Abuse can leave visible wounds, but the invisible ones, those tied to fear and mistrust, can last a lifetime if they're not addressed. Next is dependency. This is when a child is without adequate care through no direct fault of the parent. It might be due to incarceration, hospitalization, or a parent who is intellectually or emotionally unable to meet the child's needs. Dependency cases often involve families who need support, but not necessarily punishment. Still, without consistent caregiving, the child's development and safety can be at risk. Finally, and most disturbingly, we have human trafficking. Kentucky, like many other states, has documented cases of children being exploited for sex or labor. Some of these children are runaways. Others have been trafficked by people they know. These cases are heartbreaking and complex. Trafficked youth often mistrust adults and may not disclose what they've been through for a long time. Now, here's the part that matters for us. You may not know a child's entire history, but you will see the effects of these circumstances in your classroom or center. You'll see it in the child who hoards snacks, who refuses to nap, who hits without warning, who cries during transitions, or who doesn't speak at all. These children are not bad, they're not broken, they are surviving. And when we know the reasons behind their behavior, we can respond not with punishment, but with purpose. As we move forward in this training, I want you to keep these root causes in mind. They shape the child's world before you ever meet them, but they don't have to define the rest of their life. With stable care, consistent support, and compassionate adults, they can begin to heal. Now that we understand the main reasons children enter care, let's take a closer look at the risk factors, the underlying conditions that often lead to a CPS investigation and, eventually, out-of-home placement. In 2021, over 9,200 Child Protective Services investigations in our state were substantiated. That means there was enough evidence to confirm that abuse or neglect had occurred. But what's especially important is what those investigations revealed about the families involved. Substance abuse was a factor in 63.68% of those substantiated cases. That's nearly 2 out of every 3 cases. In most of these situations, the use of drugs or alcohol by a parent or caregiver created conditions that were unsafe for the child. That might mean a toddler left unattended while the parent is under the influence. It might mean a child exposed to dangerous people or environments, or it could be a newborn born with drugs in their system. And often, substance abuse doesn't happen in isolation. In over half of the cases, 51.12%, there were also mental health issues present. This might include depression, bipolar disorder, PTSD, or untreated trauma in the parent's own history. And here's where it gets even more complex. Many families don't have access to mental health care. They may not recognize the signs of illness, or they may fear judgment if they ask for help. So what we're seeing is a web of challenges: addiction, untreated mental health conditions, and a lack of support systems. The third major factor is family violence, which appeared in 44.15% of cases. Domestic violence doesn't just affect the adults involved, it deeply impacts children. Even when a child isn't the direct target, witnessing violence between caregivers is traumatic. It creates a world where safety is unpredictable and fear becomes the norm. And it often coexists with the other risk factors, making it difficult to intervene effectively without a comprehensive, trauma-informed approach. Now, I want to be very clear, these are not isolated issues. Most families in crisis are dealing with more than one of these at the same time. A parent with untreated trauma may self-medicate with substances. A violent partner may prevent someone from seeking help. Mental illness, addiction, and violence feed into one another, creating a cycle that's hard to break, especially when children are involved. For you as an educator or caregiver, knowing these risk factors can help you recognize warning signs before a crisis escalates. You might notice a child's hygiene changing, a parent who's increasingly difficult to reach, a child who's suddenly aggressive, withdrawn, or hoarding food. These are not just red flags. They're invitations for us to slow down, pay attention, and ask ourselves what might be going on behind the scenes. Remember, your role is not to diagnose or investigate, but your eyes, ears, and heart matter. You are often the one constant in a child's week, and you might be the first safe adult who notices that something is wrong. When we understand these risk factors, we can act with empathy, not just compliance, and that mindset shift is everything. When children enter foster care, they rarely come without trauma. Trauma is not just a sad backstory. It's something that shapes how children see the world, how they relate to others, and how their brains and bodies function every single day. Let's start with what causes trauma. Trauma is not just the event, it's the child's internal experience of that event. It might be a one-time experience like witnessing an arrest, or it might be ongoing like chronic neglect, exposure to substance abuse, or repeated physical abuse. What all trauma has in common is that it overwhelms the child's ability to cope and creates a deep sense of fear or helplessness. Even something that seems mild to adults, like being suddenly removed from home by a stranger, can be traumatic for a child. Imagine being 5 years old and having no idea why you're being taken away, or where you're going, or when you'll see your parent again. That's terrifying, even if it's done for your protection. Next, let's talk about the effects of trauma on behavior and development. Trauma doesn't just affect emotions, it physically rewires the brain. Children who have lived in survival mode have brains that are constantly scanning for threats. They may be hypervigilant, jumpy, or quick to melt down, or they might shut down entirely, disengage, go silent, avoid eye contact. You might see this as defiance. But what's really happening is that the child's nervous system is overwhelmed. Their behaviors, aggression, regression, tantrums, refusal to follow directions, are often adaptations. They've learned that these responses keep them safe or help them get their needs met in chaotic environments. And that brings us to the third point, understanding trauma responses. When a child hits, hides, hoards, or screams, it's not usually because they're bad, it's because their body is reacting to a threat, even if that threat isn't real in the moment. Your voice, your body language, your routine, it can all help regulate that child, or it can accidentally escalate their fear. So what can you do? First, slow down. Remember that what looks like misbehavior might be survival. Offer clear expectations, gentle redirection, and a sense of safety through routines and calm presence. Trauma-informed care isn't about giving children a pass. It's about understanding the why behind the behavior and supporting them through it, not against it. It's also important to connect with caregivers and caseworkers when you notice consistent signs of trauma. You are part of the team supporting that child, and your observations matter. In this training, we'll continue to talk about specific strategies to support children who've been through hard things. But let's start here with compassion, with awareness, and with a commitment to see every child not just as they behave, but as they are, worthy, resilient, and capable of healing. Now that we've talked about the presence of trauma in the lives of foster children, let's take a closer look at what trauma actually is and how we know when something qualifies as a traumatic experience. The term trauma is often used loosely in conversation, but in the context of child development, trauma has a very specific meaning. It refers to any experience that overwhelms a child's ability to cope and makes them feel physically or emotionally unsafe. And there are three main characteristics we use to define whether something is truly traumatic for a child. The first is a life-threatening event. That could be a direct threat to the child, like physical abuse, serious injury, or a dangerous situation at home. But it also includes threats to someone the child depends on, like watching a parent being arrested or harmed. Young children in particular don't always distinguish between danger to themselves and danger to their caregivers. If someone they love is unsafe, they feel unsafe. The second is overwhelming fear. This isn't just being scared. This is the kind of terror that floods a child's system. It might be fear of abandonment, fear of punishment, fear of loud yelling, or even fear of being removed from home. That fear gets stored in the body, and it often resurfaces later, even when the child appears calm on the outside. And finally, there's physical impact. Trauma causes real changes in the brain and body. Children may develop symptoms like headaches, stomach aches, sleep problems, or high startle responses. Their fight or flight system becomes overactive. That means their body is on high alert, even in situations where there's no actual threat. A fire drill, a sudden movement, or even a raised voice might cause them to panic, shut down, or lash out. And here's what makes it even more complex. Children may not have the words to explain what happened. They might not even understand it themselves. So instead of telling us with language, they show us with behavior. A child who suddenly wets the bed again? That could be trauma. A preschooler who stops speaking in group activities? Also trauma. A kindergartner who hides under the table every time they hear yelling? That's not misbehavior, it's memory. This is why it's so important to remember that trauma is not always visible. It's not about the event alone, it's about the impact that event had on the child's sense of safety and control. So when you see behavior that doesn't seem to fit, stop and ask, what could this child be trying to tell me? What are they reacting to, even if it happened days or months ago? When we understand trauma this way, we stop seeing children as problems to fix and start seeing them as people who need understanding, connection, and care. If we know that many children in out of home care have experienced trauma, then it naturally follows that we need to discipline differently. Traditional discipline models often focus on punishment, timeouts, removals, or harsh consequences designed to stop unwanted behavior. But for children who've experienced trauma, those approaches can do more harm than good. So, what is trauma informed discipline? It's a way of guiding behavior that's rooted in understanding, not control. It recognizes that when a child acts out, they are often communicating fear, pain, or confusion, not just testing boundaries. The goal isn't to punish, it's to teach. Let's walk through three core principles of trauma informed discipline. First, we focus on teaching. That means when a child breaks a rule or disrupts a routine, we don't just say no or send them away. We take a moment to help them understand what they should do instead. Instead of stop yelling, we might say, let's use our calm voice to tell me what you need. Instead of punishing a tantrum, we might help the child learn a coping strategy like deep breathing or using a quiet space. Next, we focus on consistency and predictability. Children who've experienced trauma often live in chaos. They don't know what to expect from the adults around them. So, when we provide clear routines, gentle transitions, and reliable reactions, we create a sense of safety. A consistent classroom schedule, calm tone of voice, and clearly explained expectations can go a long way in helping children feel secure. And finally, we use positive reinforcement. This doesn't mean we ignore challenging behavior, but it does mean that we work hard to catch children doing something right, and we name it, reinforce it, and celebrate it. When a child shares, waits their turn, or expresses themselves with words, we praise that behavior, not just with stickers or treats, but with genuine affirmation. I noticed how gently you handed the toy to your friend. That was kind. This builds confidence and helps children connect behavior with identity. I am capable. I am seen. Now, I want to be real. Trauma informed discipline takes patience. It won't fix behaviors overnight. But it does something more powerful. It helps children develop internal regulation, not just fear based compliance. They learn to manage their emotions, not just to suppress them. And they begin to trust that adults will respond to them with care, not punishment. As someone who spent years in both education and social services, I can tell you this with confidence. You don't have to be a therapist to make a therapeutic impact. Your calm presence, your gentle correction, and your belief in a child's ability to grow, that is healing work. That is trauma-informed care. When we talk about foster care, it's easy to focus on the system, on policies, agencies, and procedures. But let's bring it back to what really matters, the children. Who are the children in foster care? First and foremost, they are incredibly diverse. Children in care come from every racial, cultural, and ethnic background. You will see children who speak different languages at home, who observe different traditions, who are being raised in multi-generational households or by single parents. This diversity is something to be celebrated and something we must be mindful of when creating inclusive, respectful learning spaces. It also means that foster children may need additional support adjusting to environments that feel culturally unfamiliar. Most children who enter care have also experienced harm, not always visible, but very real. That harm often includes neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional maltreatment, or exposure to domestic violence. The reality is that for many of these children, home was not a place of safety, and that changes how they see the world. One area we're seeing more of is prenatal exposure. Many infants and toddlers in foster care were exposed to substances before birth, particularly opioids, alcohol, or other drugs. That doesn't just disappear at delivery. These children may experience withdrawal, sensory sensitivities, or challenges in emotional regulation. They may be irritable, hard to soothe, or struggle with sleep and feeding. As educators and caregivers, it's important to approach them with patience and care and to avoid labeling them as difficult. Their brains are literally learning how to adjust to the world around them. Finally, we have to talk about the impact of trauma. For many children in care, trauma didn't stop once they were removed from home. In fact, removal itself can be traumatic, especially if it happens suddenly, in the middle of the night, or without explanation. Most foster children have experienced disruption in their attachments. They may have been placed in multiple homes, switched schools, or separated from siblings. All of these experiences affect how they interact with others, how they trust adults, and how they behave in structured environments like classrooms. So, what do these facts tell us? They tell us that foster children bring with them not just needs, but stories. They bring resilience, strength, and survival. And they also bring grief, confusion, and stress. As early childhood professionals, our job is to respond with both compassion and skill. We must honor their diversity, recognize their trauma, and create spaces where they feel safe, seen, and supported. You might be the first stable, kind adult they've had in a long time. That matters more than you may ever know. In this next section, we're going to look more closely at the special needs that foster children may have when they enter your care or classroom. This is a key area of focus because many of these needs are often hidden, misunderstood, or misdiagnosed. Let's start with medical issues. Some children in foster care have chronic health conditions that require specialized treatment or regular appointments. That might include asthma, seizures, feeding issues, or prenatal exposure effects. You may notice a child who tires easily, who misses days for appointments, or who requires medication during the day. As providers, it's important to communicate with caregivers and be familiar with any medical plans that are in place. Next are physical disabilities. These might include mobility challenges, hearing or vision impairments, or other conditions that affect movement or coordination. Some children may need assistive devices like walkers, braces, or adapted seating. Others may just need small accommodations like extra time during transitions or quieter, calmer spaces. Never assume that a child's delay is due to trauma alone. Always consider that there may be an underlying physical factor. Developmental delays are also common among foster children. These can include delays in speech and language, fine and gross motor skills, or cognitive development. A 3-year-old who isn't yet speaking in full sentences, or a 4-year-old who struggles with balance or coordination, may not have had access to early screenings or intervention. Often these delays are linked to early neglect or lack of stimulation. But they are also highly responsive to support, especially in environments that provide consistent routines, nurturing relationships, and rich opportunities for play and exploration. Then we come to behavioral and mental health needs. This is where you'll see a lot of overlap with trauma. Children may struggle with emotional regulation, social interactions, or transitions. They might have diagnoses like anxiety, depression, or PTSD. But many don't have a formal diagnosis, and their behavior is often dismissed as acting out or being bad. What they really need is a consistent adult who sees beyond the behavior and offers connection, structure, and calm. What's important to understand is this: none of these needs define a child's worth or potential. They are simply starting points, challenges that can be supported with the right tools and relationships. As an educator or caregiver, your role is not to fix these needs. Your role is to recognize them, accommodate them, and advocate for the child. Work with families, specialists, and care teams. Use inclusive practices. And above all, hold on to the belief that every child, regardless of diagnosis or label, deserves joy, dignity, and the chance to thrive. These children don't need perfection. They need presence. And your presence can change everything. Let's take a deeper look at where children in out-of-home care actually live and what kinds of environments they're placed in. This gives us valuable context for understanding the systems and support they're navigating when they walk into your classroom or care setting. As of the most recent data, there are roughly 8,680 children in out-of-home care (OOHC). That number includes children from infancy through young adulthood, many of whom may still be enrolled in early learning programs, after-school care, or school-age services. The vast majority of these children are placed in foster homes. Foster homes are private households where licensed caregivers open their doors to children who cannot remain safely with their birth families. These homes provide daily care, supervision, meals, education access, and ideally, emotional support. But not every child is placed in a traditional foster home. Some children require what are called other placements. These include private childcare agencies, residential treatment facilities, pediatric hospitals or long-term medical care, independent living programs for older youth, group homes or therapeutic foster homes. These settings may be used when a child has intensive medical needs, severe behavioral health issues, or no foster family is available for their age group or circumstances. That last piece is important: availability. The need for foster homes often outpaces supply, especially for older children, large sibling groups, and children with disabilities. The small chart on this slide shows a breakdown by age. You'll notice that children entering care from birth to 5 years make up a significant portion of the foster care population. That means the children most impacted by instability are often the same ones we serve in preschool, toddler programs, and infant care. They're learning how to walk and talk while also learning what it means to feel safe and cared for. And here's something to keep in mind. Every placement change a child experiences, whether it's between foster homes or between schools, adds another layer of disruption. That instability affects attachment, learning, behavior, and trust. As early care providers, we might not be able to change where a child sleeps at night, but we can offer stability during the day. We can offer structure, routine, kindness, and predictability. We can be a place where they know what to expect and where expectations don't change based on who's in charge or how the adults are feeling that day. So when you hear that a child in your care is in foster care, know that their placement is just one part of the story. The real question to ask is, how can I be a steady, supportive adult in this moment, no matter what else is changing for them? Let's shift our focus now to something that is deeply personal for children in foster care, and that's sibling relationships. On this slide, you'll see three numbers. 4,107 children in care belong to sibling groups. 2,704 of those children were placed together, but 1,403 were placed separately. That means over one-third of sibling groups are split up when they enter foster care. Imagine what that feels like. You've just been removed from your home. Everything you know is gone: your bed, your toys, your school, your caregivers. And on top of that, you're separated from the one person who knows exactly what you've been through: your brother, your sister, your twin. For many children, siblings are more than family. They are the only consistent connection to their past. Especially in families where adults were abusive or inconsistent, siblings often form incredibly strong bonds as protectors, comforters, or sources of safety. Keeping siblings together helps preserve that sense of continuity. It lowers trauma. It improves placement stability. And it increases the chances of successful reunification or adoption in the long term. But the reality is, placement limitations make it hard. There are simply not enough foster homes that can take in sibling groups, especially when the group includes more than two children or spans a wide age range. So, what does this mean for you? Well, as early educators, you may have siblings enrolled in your program at the same time, or you may have one child whose sibling is placed elsewhere. You may hear them talk about missing their brother or wonder when their sister will visit. Sometimes a child might act out around visits or regress afterward. Those behaviors often reflect the stress of separation, the longing for connection, or confusion around permanency. This is where your role becomes incredibly valuable. You can help a child maintain their sibling bond through small but powerful gestures, letting them draw pictures or letters to send, supporting video calls or shared events when possible, offering books and materials that reflect sibling connections, simply listening when they talk about their sibling without rushing to redirect or fix the emotion. You're also in a unique position to advocate. If you notice a child is struggling due to separation from a sibling, let their caseworker or caregiver know. Your observations matter, and your voice may help prioritize sibling visits or reconnection efforts. At the heart of it all is this truth: foster care disrupts more than just homes, it disrupts relationships. When we protect and honor sibling bonds, we give children back a piece of their identity and a thread of hope in a time of uncertainty. As we continue to build a fuller picture of who's in the foster care system, it's important to take a moment to talk about age distribution. The chart on this slide gives us a snapshot of how children in care are spread across different age groups. And what it reveals is that foster care is not limited to one developmental stage. Yes, we do see a large number of young children entering care. In fact, children between the ages of birth to 5 often make up a significant percentage of new entries. But just as often, children remain in care through the elementary years, into middle school, and in many cases, into their late teens. When we think about supporting foster children in early childhood settings, we're often thinking about toddlers and preschoolers. And that's critically important. But it's also essential that we recognize the long-term arc. A child who enters care at age 3 may stay in care for years. Their experience is shaped not just by their foster family, but by every adult who interacts with them along the way: teachers, therapists, after school staff, church volunteers, coaches, and early childhood providers. Now, I want to draw your attention to the second data set on this slide, the number of foster homes available by age and demographic group. You'll notice that while we have a larger number of foster homes open to younger children, the numbers start to drop off significantly for older children, especially adolescents. This is a persistent gap in the system. Teens in care face unique challenges. Many are preparing for adulthood without the support of a permanent family. They may be moved from home to home, struggle with trust, and feel increasingly disconnected from school or peer relationships. And yet, these are the youth who need connection the most. Another important thing to notice is the racial and ethnic distribution of children in care compared to the homes available. Some groups, particularly African American and multiracial children, are overrepresented in the system relative to the available pool of culturally matched homes. This matters. When children are placed in homes where their language, food, traditions, or identity are not reflected, it can intensify feelings of isolation. Culturally responsive care isn't a bonus. It's a necessity for identity development and emotional safety. So what does all this mean for you? It means that no matter what age group you serve, there is a child in foster care who matches it. It means that we have to be intentional, not just about offering care, but about making sure that care is equitable, inclusive, and responsive to the specific needs of the child in front of us. Let this data guide your mindset. Children in care are not all the same age, race, or need, but they all share one thing. They need adults who see them, who advocate for them, and who stay committed, even when the system falls short. Now that we've talked about who the children in care are and where they live, we need to take a closer look at a persistent issue: the types of foster homes that are still desperately needed. Most foster parents are more open to caring for younger children, infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. These placements are often viewed as easier to manage behaviorally, and many families feel more equipped to meet the needs of little ones. But this leaves significant gaps for other vulnerable groups, and those are the ones we want to focus on now. First, we need more homes for older youth. These are children ages 13 to 18, teens who may be navigating puberty, peer pressure, school stress, and family trauma all at once. Many have lived in care for years. Some are approaching adulthood without ever having had a stable family. And unfortunately, they're often overlooked when placement calls go out. But these teens still need support, boundaries, mentorship, and love. They need safe places to land. They need adults who won't give up on them even when their behavior is tough. Next, we need homes for sibling groups. As we discussed earlier, keeping siblings together is essential for emotional well-being and long-term stability. But large sibling groups are hard to place. Many homes simply don't have the physical space or the bandwidth. So children end up separated, adding another layer of grief to an already difficult situation. Homes that can take in multiple children from the same family are deeply needed. Another urgent need is for homes that can support medically complex children. These are children with ongoing healthcare needs. Perhaps they require feeding tubes, seizure management, or ongoing therapy appointments. These children can thrive with the right support, but they require caregivers who are trained, patient, and well supported themselves. And finally, we need more culturally responsive homes. Homes where a child's culture isn't something they have to explain. It's something they can see and feel every day. This includes homes that reflect the child's racial or ethnic background, that speak their language, that cook familiar foods, or that share spiritual values. When children are placed in homes that don't reflect who they are, it can send an unintended message that their identity doesn't matter. So why does this matter for those of us in early care? Because the children we serve may be from one of these underrepresented groups. You may be the adult who helps fill the gap by offering cultural validation, by helping siblings stay connected through your classroom, or by modeling patient, consistent care for a medically fragile child. You may even be the one who advocates to a caseworker or a program director about a child's unique needs. And beyond that, you might be a future foster parent yourself. Many early educators already have the mindset, heart, and training it takes to provide stable care. These gaps are real, but so is the opportunity to respond. Every time we step up to meet a need, we help shift the story from scarcity to support, from isolation to inclusion. and that makes all the difference. As we start to transition from the individual stories of foster children to the structure of the child welfare system, I want to ground us in three key words, three pillars that drive every decision, policy, and practice within child welfare. And those are safety, permanency, and well-being. These terms aren't just talking points, they are federal mandates, part of national child welfare outcomes that every state is held accountable to. And more importantly, they are essential for healthy childhood development. Let's take a closer look. First, we have safety. This is the foundation. The very first priority of child welfare is to protect children from abuse and neglect. That means responding to reports, investigating concerns, and removing a child from danger when there is no other option. But it also means helping prevent abuse in the first place through education, support services, and intervention programs. Safety is not just physical, it includes emotional and environmental safety too. As early care providers, you play a critical role here. You are often the ones who notice when a child stops eating well, when bruises appear without explanation, or when behavior suddenly shifts. Your partnership in ensuring safety is irreplaceable. Next is permanency. Once a child enters care, the goal is not to leave them in limbo. The goal is to establish a permanent, stable family relationship as soon as safely possible. That might be through reunification with their birth family, through placement with a relative, or through adoption if reunification isn't possible. Permanency is about consistency. It's about giving a child the stability they need to build relationships, stay in school, and grow in environments where they know what tomorrow will bring. Children are not meant to be raised by rotating strangers or to move every 6 months. They thrive when they know who will tuck them in at night and who will still be there next week. And finally, we have well-being. This is the holistic piece, supporting a child's education, health, and developmental needs while they are in care. That includes access to therapy, early intervention services, quality childcare, and medical treatment. It also includes things like play, peer relationships, and opportunities to learn and grow like any other child. We often hear people talk about keeping children safe, but safety alone isn't enough. A child who is safe but constantly moved or safe but emotionally neglected is still at risk. That's why all three outcomes, safety, permanency, and well-being, must work together. They are interconnected, and when one is missing, the others begin to unravel. So as we continue this training, I invite you to keep these three words in mind. Let them guide how you see your role, not just as a caregiver, but as a partner in child welfare. Whether you're supporting a child in your classroom or talking with their foster parent at pickup, you are part of a much larger safety net. You don't need to know all the legal details to make a difference. You just need to remember, children need to be safe, to be settled, and to be seen. And you have the power to support all three. Let's take a deeper look at how the child welfare system and our community partners work toward that first and most urgent mandate, safety. This slide highlights a few of the services and strategies that are designed to protect children before they're ever removed from home. Because while out-of-home care is sometimes necessary, it's not the preferred starting point. The goal is always to keep families together when it's safe and possible to do so. You'll see the phrase at the top, reasonable efforts required. That means the system is legally obligated to try to keep families intact before pursuing removal. The child welfare team must show that they've offered services, interventions, or support reasonable efforts to address the risks and build protective factors at home. So what do those efforts actually look like? It might start with counseling, individual or family therapy that helps parents process their own trauma, learn better coping strategies, or rebuild trust with their children. Therapy can be a game changer when families are genuinely engaged and supported. Another common intervention is parenting classes. These classes help caregivers learn developmentally appropriate discipline, communication strategies, and routines that support child safety. For many parents, especially those who were not raised in safe homes themselves, this is the first time they're learning what healthy caregiving looks like. Next is substance abuse treatment. As we saw earlier, substance use is involved in more than 60% of foster care cases. Addressing this head-on through outpatient programs, inpatient recovery, or medication-assisted treatment is critical for ensuring long-term change. And then we have other support services, everything from housing assistance to job readiness to transportation support. These may sound small, but for families living in poverty, a missed bus or an eviction can cascade into crisis. When we remove barriers, we create space for families to heal and grow. Now, I want to pause and acknowledge something. Not all families engage in these services willingly. Some struggle to show progress. Some resist change. But many others want desperately to do better and simply don't have the resources or models to guide them. When we show up with compassion and structure, we give them a fighting chance to rebuild. And remember, these services don't just help the parents, they protect the child. They reduce the need for removal, lessen trauma, and preserve the child's connection to their identity, their school, their neighborhood, and their extended family. So when you think of safety and child welfare, think beyond just removing a child from danger. Think about what we're doing to strengthen the environment that child lives in, because when families succeed, children are safer. And that's the outcome we all want. Let's talk about one of the most serious decisions made in child welfare, the decision to remove a child from their home. This is never taken lightly. If the Department for Community-Based Services, DCBS, determines that a child cannot remain in their home safely, they must petition the court. That means they don't simply decide on their own. There is a legal process. There is judicial oversight, and that oversight is a critical safeguard for both the child and the family. At that point, a judge becomes involved. The judge's job is to weigh the evidence and determine if there are reasonable grounds to believe that returning a child to the custody of their parent or caregiver would result in dependency, neglect, or abuse. The court is not just reacting to feelings or assumptions. It must be based on documented concerns, credible reports, or professional evaluations. Now, here's something important for educators and caregivers to understand. You may be part of the information that informs this decision. Your observations, your documentation, your communication with families, these may all become part of the larger picture. That's why it is so essential to take your role seriously, to document factually, and to maintain professional boundaries. Removal is a traumatic event. Even if a child is being rescued from a dangerous situation, the experience of being taken away from everything familiar is deeply unsettling. That's why courts and agencies are encouraged to use removal as a last resort, after all reasonable efforts to stabilize the home have been attempted. But when removal does occur, it is a legal action. It is not simply DCBS taking the child away. It is a judge, an officer of the court, who ultimately signs off on that decision. This ensures due process and legal protections for all parties, including birth parents and guardians. From the child's perspective, though, none of that legal language matters in the moment. What matters is that they're suddenly in a new place with new people, unsure of what's next. As someone who works with children day in and day out, your response to a child post-removal can either reinforce their sense of danger or help begin the process of repair. You don't have to know all the court details, but you do need to offer presence, predictability, and patience. Because for that child, your calm face may be the first sign that things are going to be okay. Once a child is in out-of-home care, the system's next priority becomes clear: permanency. That means we're not just keeping the child safe. We're working to ensure they have a stable, long-term family relationship that will carry them through childhood and beyond. But permanency isn't just a destination, it's a process. And there are several strategies that child welfare agencies use to help get children there. First, we focus on preserving connections. Children need to stay rooted in the relationships and communities that give them a sense of identity and belonging. This might include extended family, neighbors, church members, school staff, anyone who has been a consistent part of the child's world. Maintaining these bonds helps reduce trauma and gives the child a foundation of familiarity during a time of great change. Next, we aim for community placement. That means placing children in homes within their own community or the closest proximity possible. When children stay in the same school, neighborhood, or town, they're more likely to maintain friendships, school progress, and emotional stability. The farther away they're placed, the more loss they experience, loss of culture, routines, and personal history. Third, we work to keep siblings together. We covered this earlier, but it's worth emphasizing again here. Siblings are often a child's primary source of comfort and stability. Whenever possible, the system prioritizes placing siblings in the same home or at least maintaining regular contact when placement together isn't possible. And then there's the issue of timelines. The child welfare system operates under legal deadlines for permanency planning, for review hearings, and for termination of parental rights, often referred to as TPR. These deadlines are in place to prevent children from languishing in the system. The longer a child stays in limbo, the more damage is done to their development and sense of trust. Permanency might mean reunification with birth parents. It might mean guardianship with a relative. Or it might mean adoption by a foster parent or another committed adult. Whatever the outcome, the goal is the same: a forever connection, a place to call home. One more thing, regular visitation with parents and siblings is often part of this process. Even when children are not able to live with their family right away, maintaining those connections through supervised visits, phone calls, or video chats is crucial for emotional continuity. And for many families, visitation is part of the healing process that leads to reunification. As educators and caregivers, you can help. You can support the child's transitions. You can communicate with foster families about what's working in the classroom. You can share developmental concerns or emotional shifts that may relate to family visits. And above all, you can show up every day with empathy, understanding that permanency is not just a legal outcome, it's an emotional one. Every child deserves to know where they belong, and every effort we make to get them there matters. As we move into the final core outcome of child welfare, well-being, I want to be clear that this is not just a bonus or a nice to have. Well-being is fundamental to a child's success, safety, and lifelong development. We can't stop at removal. We can't stop at finding a placement. We must go further. We must ask, is this child thriving? Do they have access to education, emotional support, physical health care, social stability, and healthy relationships? Well-being work begins with family capacity building. This means equipping families with the knowledge, tools, and support to meet their children's needs safely, consistently, and confidently. That might include parenting classes, coaching, budgeting help, or support navigating medical systems. The focus is on growth, not punishment. Child welfare agencies work closely with families to build this capacity so that when reunification becomes possible, the family is ready to meet their child's needs without the same risks repeating. Another key component is regular monitoring. After a child enters care, caseworkers are required to visit with them and with their caregivers on a consistent basis. These visits assess the child's safety, physical health, emotional stability, academic progress, and overall adjustment to placement. Monitoring isn't just about oversight, it's about relationship. The worker becomes a consistent adult presence, a person who can notice when something's off, a person who can advocate, intervene, or celebrate progress. Then we have comprehensive services. Think of this as the holistic support package. Children and their families may need therapy, speech-language services, early intervention, dental care, tutoring, or specialized medical support. All of those services are considered essential to well-being. They're not extra, they're the backbone of healthy development. In many ways, this is where early care and education professionals like you come in. You are often the first to notice speech delays, motor issues, emotional outbursts, or signs of developmental need. Your observations help inform referrals. Your patience helps children regulate. Your classroom becomes the testing ground for social emotional growth. And finally, we emphasize a team approach. No one professional can support a child in care on their own. Caseworkers, foster families, birth families, therapists, teachers, and medical providers must work together. That collaboration, when done well, can make the difference between a child who survives the system and one who heals through it. I want you to take a moment and ask yourself, how do I support child well-being in my day-to-day practice? It may not look like a grand gesture. It may be something small, like asking about a visit, accommodating a need, or giving a child space to regulate. But over time, those actions accumulate. They become a buffer, a healing force. Well-being isn't just about services, it's about stability, joy, connection, and dignity. And every child in care deserves that, no matter what brought them to the system. We've talked a lot about what the child welfare system does. Now let's talk about what guides it. Behind every decision, every procedure, and every court order in child welfare is a framework of laws, a carefully developed blend of federal and state regulations. These laws set the standards for safety, permanency, and well-being, and they're designed to strike a delicate balance between protecting children and respecting the rights of families. Let's start with the federal level. There are several major federal laws that shape child welfare practice in every state. These laws dictate how quickly a child must receive a permanency plan, when parental rights can be terminated, how reunification should be prioritized, and how funding can be used to support both prevention and placement. We'll go into the specifics of these laws shortly. Federal law is what ensures consistency across state lines. It says that no matter where a child lives, they are entitled to protection, to due process, and to a plan that gives them a path forward. But each state has its own set of laws and procedures as well. These laws interpret the federal mandates through a local lens, taking into account community resources, court practices, agency structures, and cultural context. For example, the definition of neglect may vary slightly from state to state. The process for foster parent licensure may differ. The timeline for court hearings may follow different calendars, but the guiding principles stay the same. So, what does this mean for you? You're not expected to memorize statutes or act as a legal expert, but you do need to understand that child welfare is not arbitrary. Every action, whether it's placing a child in care, reunifying with a parent, or initiating adoption, must follow legal procedures. And that matters for a few reasons. First, it protects children by creating systems of oversight, accountability, and checks and balances. It ensures that no single person or agency can make life-altering decisions without justification. Second, it protects families, especially those who have been marginalized, misunderstood, or historically discriminated against in child welfare systems. Legal processes provide due process, representation, and the opportunity for families to grow and reunify. And finally, these laws help create a roadmap for permanency. They prevent children from getting stuck in limbo, drifting from placement to placement without a clear plan. The law is the spine of the system, but the heart, that's you. The educators, the caregivers, the family advocates, the therapists, the caseworkers. You breathe life into these policies with your presence, your empathy, and your commitment to doing what's right for kids. In the next few slides, we'll break down the most impactful federal child welfare laws so you can see how they've shaped the system we work in today. As we begin this next section, we're going to look at the legal backbone of child welfare in the United States. 5 major federal laws that guide everything from how children are placed in foster care to how families are supported during reunification and beyond. These laws don't just sit on shelves. They actively shape the decisions that are made in classrooms, courtrooms, and caseworker visits across the country. Let's walk through them one at a time. First, we have the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, or MEPA, passed in 1994 and amended in 1996. This law prohibits discrimination in foster and adoptive placements based on race, color, or national origin. The goal of MEPA is to ensure that children aren't left waiting in the system simply because there's no exact race match with a family. It was designed to prioritize safe and timely placements while still honoring cultural identity when possible. We'll go into more detail about MEPA on the next slide. The second key law is the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997, often called ASEFA. This act shifted the national focus toward child safety and timely permanency. It introduced strict timelines to ensure that children don't linger in foster care for years without a permanent plan. For example, one major provision requires that if a child has been in foster care for 15 out of the past 22 months, the state must begin proceedings to terminate parental rights, unless specific exceptions apply. Next, we have the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act, passed in 2008. This legislation made important strides in supporting kinship care, meaning the placement of children with relatives instead of strangers. It also extended foster care services for youth aging out of the system, helping them transition more smoothly into adulthood. The fourth law is the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act from 2015. This law enhanced protections for vulnerable children, especially youth at risk of trafficking. It also emphasized the importance of normalcy, ensuring foster youth have the chance to engage in typical developmental activities like sports, sleepovers, and part-time jobs without unnecessary red tape. And finally, we have the Family First Prevention Services Act, or FFPSA, which passed in 2018. This law marks a major shift. It moves federal support upstream, focusing more on prevention, helping families before they reach a crisis point. It also strongly encourages family-based placements over group care or institutions. The idea is to invest in stability, not just react to instability. Together, these 5 laws form the legal foundation of our child welfare system. They create guardrails, they set timelines, they define priorities. But remember, laws are only as powerful as the people who uphold them. That includes social workers, judges, foster families, and yes, early childhood professionals like you. Whether you realize it or not, you're already working within the framework of these laws every day. So, as we dig into each one a bit more, I want you to reflect on how your daily practice already aligns with these federal values: safety, permanency, and child well being. As we begin this next section, we're going to look at the legal backbone of child welfare in the United States. 5 major federal laws that guide everything from how children are placed in foster care to how families are supported during reunification and beyond. These laws don't just sit on shelves. They actively shape the decisions that are made in classrooms, courtrooms, and caseworker visits across the country. Let's walk through them one at a time. First, we have the Multi-Ethnic Placement Act, or MEPA, passed in 1994 and amended in 1996. This law prohibits discrimination in foster and adoptive placements based on race, color, or national origin. The goal of MEPA is to ensure that children aren't left waiting in the system simply because there's no exact race match with a family. It was designed to prioritize safe and timely placements while still honoring cultural identity when possible. We'll go into more detail about MEPA on the next slide. The second key law is the Adoption and Safe Families Act of 1997, often called ASEFA. This act shifted the national focus toward child safety and timely permanency. It introduced strict timelines to ensure that children don't linger in foster care for years without a permanent plan. For example, one major provision requires that if a child has been in foster care for 15 out of the past 22 months, the state must begin proceedings to terminate parental rights, unless specific exceptions apply. Next, we have the Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act, passed in 2008. This legislation made important strides in supporting kinship care, meaning the placement of children with relatives instead of strangers. It also extended foster care services for youth aging out of the system, helping them transition more smoothly into adulthood. The fourth law is the Preventing Sex Trafficking and Strengthening Families Act from 2015. This law enhanced protections for vulnerable children, especially youth at risk of trafficking. It also emphasized the importance of normalcy, ensuring foster youth have the chance to engage in typical developmental activities like sports, sleepovers, and part-time jobs without unnecessary red tape. And finally, we have the Family First Prevention Services Act, or FFPSA, which passed in 2018. This law marks a major shift. It moves federal support upstream, focusing more on prevention, helping families before they reach a crisis point. It also strongly encourages family-based placements over group care or institutions. The idea is to invest in stability, not just react to instability. Together, these 5 laws form the legal foundation of our child welfare system. They create guardrails, they set timelines, they define priorities. But remember, laws are only as powerful as the people who uphold them. That includes social workers, judges, foster families, and yes, early childhood professionals like you. Whether you realize it or not, you're already working within the framework of these laws every day. So, as we dig into each one a bit more, I want you to reflect on how your daily practice already aligns with these federal values: safety, permanency, and child well being. I want to personally thank you for being attentive to this training because it is very important. The more our educators know about the foster care and adoption process, the more we can continue supporting children and families. It also makes us a great member of the community who is able to work with empathy and show love to those that need it the most. Thank you.